we spoke at the USB LeadersAngle program. The topic was NeuroLeadership, and we touched on various things like the differences between the male and the female brain, as well as sensory intelligence. And then we also looked at how the science of neuroscience links to leadership and leadership development. An edited version of this discussion is available on the USB web. So if you would need to ask me what is the definition of neuroleadership, and if I need to give you a textbook definition, it's really around taking neuroscientific knowledge, building the bridge towards leadership, coaching, training, parenthood, how to communicate better, and giving us the hard evidence of why certain behaviors are working and why other things are not working. The aim of this field is really to help people to develop a better understanding of how the human mind functions, and to take that and get them to improve their effectiveness, performance, and productivity. And it really works on an individual, a team, and a systemic level. This is just to give you a brief overview of the brain. And there's the four lobes, the parietal, occipital, temporal, and the frontal lobe. The important thing I would like to highlight here is the prefrontal cortex, which is right in the front over there. And the prefrontal cortex is the area of the brain that we use for all our higher level executive thought processes, decision making, problem solving. If we have an insight, what do we do with that to kind of convert that into something extremely creative? So it's really around trying to find that balance of how do I keep this prefrontal cortex in check for me to function effectively. Gary Hamel, and most of you might be familiar with him, he is the person who wrote the book, The Future of Management, and he talks a lot about reclaiming our humanity. And what he basically says is that the organizations in which we live, the organizations in which we work are less human than what we are. So people become more and more disengaged the more they don't have power of choice, a place where they can thrive and talk about the things that they need to talk about. So if you are a CEO of a company, why would you want to create an environment where people cannot thrive and where they're not tapped where their creativity and their passion and their innovation is not tapped? And neuroleadership is a tool that we can use to get people to thrive and be more involved and passionately involved in what they do.
Now, the focus that we use in sensory intelligence is really around how do we use your senses, what you see, hear, touch, taste, and smell. And movement is also another sense of you, to understand your brain better and to also have insight in how does this impact on human behavior, performance, relationships in the workplace. We talk about a lot about, from a neuroscience perspective, on thresholds. Each of us have particular thresholds. If we think about pain thresholds, people who's got a low pain threshold actually experience pain very quickly, so they're sensitive. People who's got a high threshold, they kind of can hang on to a lot before it starts to become uncomfortable. Now, we have a certain kind of threshold for each of your sensory systems. And this is uniquely part of our genetic wiring and how we are made up and how the brain is actually wired. So to give you a little bit of an example for that, if we look at the visual system, who of you, for instance, would have your calendar just one day versus a whole month? What's your computer screensaver looking like? Do you use red, yellow, green Post-it notes, or do you use white or cream ones? So this is, for instance, your threshold for your visual system will actually predetermine how you set up your Outlook calendar. If we look at the auditory system, are you sitting next to electronic noise? Do you have a radio on in your working environment? And then there's certain people that hate the radio on in a work environment. So if we look at noise levels in any kind of work environment, it's quite a strong and a very powerful deterrent of relationships. It impacts how comfortable people feel, and it creates a lot of conflict in the workplace, by the way. If we look at the tactile system, the touch system, your skin system, this is our social sense. And here, open plan office environments are a brilliant example to use. This is the norm. We all have to work primarily in open plan office environments. How close do you sit to someone else next to you? Because if you've got low thresholds, you don't want to sit too close to someone else. And if you do, you know what? Your cognitive executive functions of your brain will be impacted. You won't work as well because primitively your brain isn't in a good comfort zone. If we look at smell is interesting. It's one of your most powerful senses. It's got a hotline in the brain. It does not get filtered. And you know what? I'm the one that's allowed to talk about body odor in open plan office spaces and how that really does impact people's attention, their level of distraction, and how comfortable they feel. So just a little bit of a key of how your sensory intelligence, and it's not something that you need to, like IQ or EQ, you don't need to improve your sensory intelligence score. You use the insight and the knowledge to actually surround your work environment to such an extent with minor adaptation that your body feels comfortable. So if your body feels comfortable, it actually releases your executive brain to do all the good and the performance level stuff that you need.
What interests me about neuroscience, though, is that it's giving an underpinning now to our understanding of relationship and the way in which men and women function very differently, as we well know anecdotally. I think it's important that we begin to look at all of the different management theories that we have, communications theories, decision-making models, all those things I'm beginning to look at through the filter of, does that work in the same way for men that it does for women? But the missing element, the missing understanding really is in the female brain. We haven't really made a distinction between the male and the female brain. And the male brain and male thinking patterns and emotional processing patterns have dominated all of our institutions. We needed to have this gender separation, gender role differences were all important when we were surviving on a survival level. But now that we've moved into a different level of function with much greater complexity, it's very important that we begin to engage not just women's feeling processes, which we all know women are good at, but women's thinking processes, which are far more complex than male thinking processes, because the female brain is far more complex than the male brain. 98% of our brains are exactly the same, but it's that last little bit that makes all the difference in the world. The male brain was designed to be out of doors. What men have been doing for thousands of years before 1860 was hunting, protecting their families, fighting wars with bravery, tenacity, and short-term tactical thinking. And those three things are hardwired into the male brain through structures and also through vasopressin and various chemicals in the brain. So men are really good at, they have a left brain bias. They're great at logical, linear thought processes, not so good at processing emotions because the right hemisphere does not work at the same time as the left hemisphere. They're not completely enmeshed in the same way that you have in the female brain. They are wonderful at spatial perception and abstract thinking abilities. And all these things create the kind of thinking patterns for the male. The female brain. What about the female brain? It was adapted to raise and educate children, to manage the homestead in the absence of men who are mostly outdoors. She's capable of complex thinking and reasoning. She's got a larger prefrontal cortex than the male brain does. Greater sensual awareness. We register a wider range of sounds and colors. Processing complex emotional information, the female brain does much better. And also we can track, the female can track their thinking and their emotional processing using words. Because the female brain has 6 cortical centers that serve language throughout the brain, whereas the male brain has 1 cortical center for language in the left hemisphere. So for a man to talk about his logical linear thought processes is easy. but he doesn't find words to describe his feelings very easily at all. What women have been doing for thousands of years is effectively planning and managing people and processes. And now, of course, we know all the management studies are showing that women are much, not just a little, much better managers in the corporate world than men are. That doesn't, I'm just talking about management, not there are many other functions in the corporate world. So what we need is to engage men and women together in thinking pairs, in dialoguing with each other, because our thinking works beautifully together, but it's the communications that we have to get right. Women need to learn how to think like women and communicate more carefully and clearly like men.
We know now from new knowledge out of the brain sciences that the physical environment is critically important. One of the first professions to understand the importance of this were the architects. So for instance, if I look at this room based on what they say, if you raise the ceiling height here by less than a meter, you would enhance the creativity of the people in this room. And they've tested that. And they've been able to research that and show that just small changes in the environment can make us more creative and more productive. Another is very fascinating area is just exercise and nutrition. Business leaders don't really regard part of their role to make sure that the people in their organizations are getting the exercise they need and the nutrition they need. But actually, from a productivity point of view, it would be a very good idea to have treadmills spread out throughout the building in any office organization, and to encourage people to get on them, even for just 10 minutes at a time, because as soon as you start to do that and you start to exercise and you get the blood flowing to the brain, you become more productive and you think better and you think more clearly. Your cognitive skills are enhanced. So why not? We don't consider what it takes to enhance the cognitive capabilities that we have, because we make an assumption, a bad assumption by the way, that by the time we reach a certain age it's all fixed. Well, we now know from brain science that it's not. That you can continue to enhance your cognitive capabilities well into your 80s and 90s. So let's talk about another aspect of leadership, which is, how do we learn? We know also that most people can't pay attention for more than about 10 minutes. So when you think about the 50-minute or the 45-minute lecture cycle, if we've lost them in the first 10, then what are we spending all that money on in the next 35 minutes for in the first place? We know that 80% of that information is lost within a matter of 30 days or 90 days. In fact, a lot of it's lost within literally minutes. So how do we address that? We're beginning to learn from neuroscience that it can be addressed, that we can become much more effective in the learning environment. Get involved in this stuff. It's hugely important, because I think what you will learn will make a difference in your personal lives, in how you raise your children and how you manage your relationships.
Are there any practical examples of where this has been applied in companies and where people have been seeing the results? So maybe Anna-Marie, if I can hand that question over to you.
Well, just from a call center perspective, I've designed a recruitment tool around sensory intelligence for call centers to actually determine who would be the best natural environmental fit for the industry. And yes, I've worked with various companies. It's been launched 2 years ago, so we are using it as a deterrent of who would be the best call center agent, with yes, very positive results. Less absenteeism and better attrition, obviously.
Maybe if I can just add to that, I don't know if you're familiar with the Google offices and how they look internal. There's a perfect example for you for where it's been, because they need to ooze creativity, and that's exactly what they've done there. So they've created the physical space, which Tony spoke about just now, perfectly, very well, and they've seen the results of
But if I can add to that, for the most part, I mean, I've gone out and spoken with a lot of companies, and for the most part, when you start to talk about the human brain in the corporate environment, you can tell if this is the first time anybody's ever addressed this in that environment. It's not something that they're familiar with. Most people have almost no knowledge at all of their own brain function. And so it's very early days, I think.
Yeah. Okay. I also focus on sensory chill rooms for the call center space, because I think that's crucial. And it's very foreign language for companies. And some of them really get it right, but there's a lot of resistance and lack of knowledge, for sure. Yes.
I've been working in corporate interventions, as you said, it's very recent, but doing thinking pairs, male-female decision-making and thinking pairs, getting men and women, not necessarily from the same department even, but just to come together, and I've got a sort of format that I use, so that they can come together and think about a problem, and then the female does what she does, the man does what he does, and then they begin to refine the thinking process and come up with solutions. And I'm finding that absolutely fascinating. And people don't know anything about it until you tell them about it. And then the minute the light bulb comes on and they can see the benefits of it, it is extraordinary what actually happens.
All right, so a lot of new information and a lot of new science results coming our way, and it's really around how are we going to use this to rethink and create places that are more fit for human life. And that's it for now, so thank you very much.